A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. So before I begin, I'll just give you a quick overview of this presentation, about 20 minutes. We'll be done before 20 minutes of how it's going to break down. So first, I'll just give an overview of the subject, good without God, some basic points to understand in the beginning. Then I'll ask questions, and it's going to be a hard question. So you might have to think hard to figure out what are examples that I'm looking for here. It requires some critical thinking. Then after that, I'll give another 5-minute explanation of some practical things that we can do, the importance of putting this into practice. And then we'll also have another interactive question. So that's the way it's going to break down, about 5 minutes of me talking, 5 minutes of me asking you. So be ready for when I ask you a question that, be enthusiastic about sharing an answer. You can guess. There's actually no like black and white, right and wrong answer. It's just, formulating, figuring out what the best answer is. So to start off, I'll share a presentation. Hopefully you can see it on your screen. The first point is good without God. So here, this is the basic title of the presentation. This is what we want to cover, because the most basic thing that we talk to people about is goodness. Even somebody who doesn't believe in God, we can talk to them about goodness. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Rabi Rahmatullah Alayhi explained that a lot of times there is this apprehension that how are we going to talk to people about God? And in our society, we definitely feel it. A lot of times people don't even believe in God. They're so allergic to talking about God that they'll switch off the second you bring it up. So, but one thing that nobody can run from is the subject of goodness, the subject of good. So let's go into some statistics first. 40% of Americans do not believe in God. In addition to that, 62% of Americans are leaving organized religion altogether, the greatest decline in a century. So these are two statistics that we may already be aware of without even having to have been told. We know that people in general are turning away from organized religion. They look at it with suspicion. They're not finding value in it. And then a smaller number, but still a very significant minority, they're turning away from even the concept of God. So while spirituality is still more alive than organized religion, but belief in both of these things in our country is on the decline. This is the ground reality in the United States of America. The next point is, just switch to the next slide. The question on everyone's mind is, can you be good without God? Now, this is a subject that applies to everybody. It applies to every individual. It doesn't matter if somebody is an atheist, a believer, whatever it is, because we all agree on the need to be good. Nobody says that I don't need God, so I don't need to be good anymore. Good is something that's so fundamental that no human being can deny it. And this is also something Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Rabi Rahmatullah Alayhi explained, that you can't escape goodness. Everybody wants to be good. So this is the point of conversation. Now comes to how do we discuss this with atheists from a theoretical perspective? It's important to grasp this because we have to know exactly why it is that Islam is founded on the truth, and why it is that those who oppose Islam are founded on falsehood. There's no way of escaping it. So when we discuss this with atheists, one thing that you'll often hear, you've already heard it 100 times before, the general atheist position is that they will not believe in God. They don't believe in religion. They don't accept things related to spirituality because there is no falsifiable evidence for it. There's no empirical evidence. Evidence is what you hear. And you'll hear these words from time to time. The people add emphasis, falsifiable, empirical, until you can show me, demonstrate to me in some way that it can be put into an experiment. It's demonstrable. It's based in reality. It's based in scientific facts. So this is a very basic fundamental and a kind of line in the sand that's drawn between theists and atheists, that an atheist or an agnostic is someone who is skeptical, who only believes once they have scientific, physical evidence that's falsifiable and empirical. Whereas on the other hand, a theist is someone who blindly believes, who just accepts things without any reason. So here, the first point to point out, and the reason why it's a very good to start this discussion on good and bad, good and evil, is that there is actually no such thing as good without God. Not in the sense that you can't accidentally be good. You can't be good according to Islam's definition. That's not what I mean. I mean that you can't even define goodness without God. Nobody can say that this is good and this is bad based on any scientific reason, based on any empirical evidence. Now, there's a couple of examples here that there's an answer to this question, that can you be good without God? One example, and these are the examples I want you to start thinking of right now. In a minute, I'm going to ask you, give me some more examples like this. One example here is slaughtering animals for food murder? That's a question. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. There's people in our society who very literally consider it to be murder. It's life. How can you just kill it for food when you have alternatives, when you can be a vegan? So there are people who consider it murder, and they consider those people who kill animals for food to be murderers in a sense. They consider it to be a very bad thing. It's not a small point that they believe in. Then there's another question, abortion. Is that murder or not? There are a lot of people in our society who do think it's murder. They think that life is sacred, it is special from the point of conception. So that's also a point of philosophy. So these are just two examples, but understand that both of these questions, they have nothing to do with science. They're branches of philosophy. They're beliefs. They're always based on an assumption. For example, somebody might come up to you and tell you that killing pigs is murder. And they'll give you a whole bunch of scientific arguments. They'll say that, look, the intelligence of a pig is to this level. This is how much cognition a chicken has, or a plant, and so on and so forth. So since a pig or a cow has this much intelligence, therefore it's wrong to murder it. It seems like now this is a very scientific argument, but that's not the case. Don't be confused by it. These are supporting arguments that are based in science. Science can tell us how intelligent a pig is, or a cow is, or a chicken is, or a plant is. It can tell us what level of cognition is in those animals, but it doesn't tell us at what point life becomes special. That does life become sacred or special at this point of intelligence? Science doesn't tell us anything about that. Anybody who has a belief about that, it's an assumption. It's an opinion that they have, it's a belief. So never forget that this question of good and bad, it's a branch of philosophy. No matter how many supporting scientific arguments somebody gives, it doesn't change it to a different branch. It doesn't change it to a branch of science. If they think it does, then they should first go into their local university and convince them that you should move your ethics class now to a class on biology or science or chemistry. It doesn't make any sense. Nobody's going to do that. So be very firmly founded in the fact that this discussion is not based in science. It is a branch of philosophy which is always based on assumptions. There are supporting arguments that are scientific, but it is always fundamentally based on assumptions, and it is a branch of philosophy. The other example here, which is abortion. People who have an opinion on this, they'll give you all sorts of arguments from a scientific perspective, that at this point, the fetus, the heart starts beating. At this many weeks after conception, this is a level of intelligence in that fetus, cognition, brain activity. All those are fine supporting arguments. But the fundamental thing is that science does not tell us that at this point, that life becomes special, where it's now murder. It's now fetal homicide to abort that fetus. Science doesn't tell us anything about when fetal homicide starts, when murder starts, when it's now bad, when it's evil, when it's wrong to take that life. So these are a couple of examples. So now after that opening part, now I want to come to asking you questions. So the question that I have for you is, what are some other examples on the ground in our society, the way you interact, when you look on social media, when you see different discussions that are happening? What are opinions that people have that are just purely opinions and beliefs on what is right and wrong? Like this example that I gave, that there are vegans who have an opinion that killing animals, slaughtering animals for food is murder. They think it's wrong. There are people who think that aborting a fetus at any point during the pregnancy is wrong. It is morally wrong. It is murder. So what are some other examples where you see that it's subjective? It's an opinion that people have in our society, where it's a point of disagreement in our society on what is wrong, on what is evil, on what is good and bad. So what comes to mind? Anybody who has anything on their minds, please feel free to share. I'll look in the chat menu, and also if someone wants to unmute themselves, then maybe through the technical team, they can do so.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum, Rabbi sir.
Wa alaikum assalam.
So I'll give maybe another common example, which I don't know if it maybe fits your question, but stealing food to feed your family, good or bad.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point. So there's a question of theft, of stealing. That's something that, generally society agrees is wrong. And then what justifies theft? So that's definitely a point of some disagreement in our society. Okay. Some people might consider it good and justified to do it. And other times people might consider it wrong. It's wrong to do it entirely. Any other examples that come to anyone's mind? So what we're looking for is that you have people who have differing opinions on something, and their position forces them to consider the other person to be wrong. But it's just all based on opinion. It's all based on belief. Anybody have another example that comes to mind, just based on ground realities, what you interact with people on?
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam.
What about should hate speech be banned? Is it protected by the First Amendment?
Okay, so free speech. So I think one of the points that is involved there is that there is a point where it becomes hate speech. And there's different countries that disagree. What's considered allowed and legal in America, you could actually get arrested for in Germany or in France because they would consider it hate speech. So that's also an example of a subject where, not just on laws, but when it comes to morals and ethics, some people consider it right. And if you disagree with them, they actually think that you're wrong. So somebody in France who believes in that French concept of free speech, they would actually look at some of the things that we allow here in the United States and say that, no, that's hate speech. It's actually wrong for a country to allow it because you're putting your minorities in danger. I'll give one example to kind of help out also. Another example is capital punishment. Capital punishment is a big debate in our society. And there are a lot of people in our society who say that, okay, we shouldn't have capital punishment. But if somebody did a mass killing, you killed a whole bunch of children, there's video evidence of it. There was security footage. The person admitted to it. We know he did it 100%. So in that case, we should execute him. We should give capital punishment. And then there's other people in our society who say that, no, the government has no moral right to kill anybody. Capital punishment is fundamentally morally wrong. So here also you have another issue. Just based on opinions and beliefs, you have one segment of society who actually thinks that if you think it's okay for capital punishment to exist for any reason, it's evil, it's wrong. It is fundamentally immoral for you to hold that position and to want to bring it into action where you would allow the government to kill somebody under any circumstance. So there's also another example of a debate, a very lively debate in our society, where people have genuine disagreement. There's merits to both sides of the argument. There's no falsifiable empirical evidence to prove one side or the other wrong, because the whole disagreement is on, does the government ever have a right to take the life of somebody who's taken the life of others? So that's an example. So we have a couple of examples in the chat. You have marijuana, drugs, also a very good example, because there's no consistency in our society. We think alcohol is okay, but then cocaine and crack is illegal. It's wrong. It's just purely subjective. There you can see again. Now, of course, a person could make a scientific argument there that there's a degree of harm that it does to society, but it's a decent example to show that our beliefs on a lot of these subjects are very subjective. US nuclear bombing of Japan, yeah, that's a very good example. So right here, you have people in our country who genuinely believe that that was a good thing that we did. It was a necessary evil, or even that we saved lives by doing it, by dropping a nuclear bomb on women and children and civilians, that there was nothing morally objectionable about that. There are plenty of people in our society who are 100% convinced of that, who don't think that was a war crime, who don't think that was a bad thing. And then there are other people who say that that was a war crime, that was wrong, to drop a nuclear bomb on a civilian city, even though there might have been some factories that are making weapons for war, but there's schools, there's children, it's a civilian city. They say that's wrong. They say it's fundamentally immoral, it's wrong. So these are some good examples, and I appreciate that. And the basic purpose of asking these questions was to get that ball rolling in our mind. Premarital cohabitation, premarital sex also. It's not something that it's a subjective thing. It's not, it's a lot of these examples, they come back to that thing. So this is just to get the ball rolling in our mind, that we have to understand that people have to have opinions on these things. Somebody can say that, okay, I don't know if God exists or not, so I don't know. I don't have an opinion on it. But you can't not have an opinion on a lot of these subjects. On capital punishment, that affects your society. Your congressman is going to vote on it. When it comes to animals, slaughterhouses, there's meat on your grocery store shelves. It's a moral question. Should it even be there, or is it wrong? If it's okay for pig meat to be there, then why can't we have dog meat? What about some other meat? When it comes to abortion, you can't avoid that question. You can't just say that I don't know. I can't say. No, it's a situation that you might face in your life. So you have to have an opinion on these questions. And so this leads us to the reality, which is the next, and yeah, this was the slide that we just went over, that what are examples that come to your mind? But the reality is that without God, there is no good and bad. You can't define it. Our country is more divided every day on the basis of what's good and what's bad. Many Americans don't think you're good based on the position you take. And a lot of times it's based on your politics, that what you believe or what I believe, based on that, there are other Americans, for completely secular, atheistic, non-religious reasons, they'll think that you are a bad person or I'm a bad person. So we can only know what's good through belief in a higher power, by uniting in belief in God. Each one of us has the need to find that higher power. Now, if you look at our country, we're becoming more and more divided without God on the most fundamental things that have to do with good and bad. It wasn't like that in the past. In the past, America, of course, the United States has its own issues. But when we were a religious country, we didn't have fundamental differences on the basics of what is good and bad on a lot of things that we're questioning nowadays. And this division is actually going to get worse. This is what the projections are. Even if we didn't have these projections, even if we didn't have experts telling us this, our kind of intuition, our common sense tells us that no, the division in our country is getting worse between theists and atheists, between liberals and conservatives, between different people on the political spectrum, even within the same political party, those divisions are getting worse. So as people go away from the source of the definition of good and evil, they become more and more divided on the most basic points of disagreement that never even came up before. So when we speak with atheists and when we speak with agnostics, this is a position of strength that we should always found ourselves on. We should know we're established on this point, which is that you can't define good and bad without God. And if you have a position on it, then it's just a belief you hold. It's just an assumption. It's just based on nothing. The other person who disagrees with you is just as valid from an evidence perspective to argue his position as well. So in order to have morality, a definition of morality, an agreement, a unity on an absolute morality, there has to be belief in a singular higher power. So this is one way that we can bring people towards God. We can bring people towards God in conversation, because every single person has a need for a higher authority by which we can define morality. This discussion always has to come back to this point. You can't escape God. We can't run from him. So when we speak with an atheist, when we speak with an agnostic, if we start talking about goodness, it's always something they're going to be interested in. It's not something that they can say that they have no opinion on. It's not like they can say about God, I don't care, I don't have any opinion. When it comes to goodness, they have to have an opinion. And after that, they can choose to not talk to you. Maybe they just don't want to talk about it, but they have an opinion. And that opinion is just a belief of theirs. And that conversation, it eventually has to lead to the need for a belief in a higher authority, in a higher power, and ultimately in one being who will unite us. So now we'll come to the last point in this presentation. The last point in the presentation is on how do we connect this with God Almighty, with Allah Almighty, as Islam has taught. Here, Hazrat Masih Maud ﷺ has taught that we all have a search for God, for a higher power. We all have that search. And this is something that's found in everybody, no matter if they're atheist or agnostic. So when we bring people to this point, you don't have to believe in God. You're talking to an atheist, but you have to accept that we need a higher authority. Without that, this conversation is just completely meaningless. It's just going completely nowhere. So when we get people to at least accept that you need a higher authority, then we can bring them to the point that there is a need for a higher power and for a God. So here, this is a quotation of Hazrat Masih Maud ﷺ. Let me just flip to it. And this is a point that brings theory to practicality. So everything that we've talked about in this presentation up until now, it was theory, but now we need to come to practicality. The promised Messiah ﷺ said that of the natural conditions of man is his search after an exalted being towards whom he has an inherent attraction. It is this attraction which the true creator has implanted in the nature of man. The same attraction comes into play whenever a person feels love for another. It is a reflection of the attraction that is inherent in man's nature towards God, as if he is in search of something that he misses, the name of which he has forgotten and which he seeks to find in one thing or another, which he takes up from time to time. A person's love of wealth or offspring or wife or his soul being attracted towards a musical voice are all indications of this search for the true beloved. So all the points that we covered up until now, they were just theoretical. You can take these arguments and you can win an argument with any debate in an atheist on them, because most atheists don't even realize that they're holding blind beliefs on these subjects. They think that everything is empirical, whereas they don't realize that philosophy and these philosophical subjects are based on assumptions. So this is all debate up until now. This is just argumentation. You can even make it into a debate game, but there's no spirituality in it yet. Now comes application. We are calling people towards God, the need for a God. It means that before we call people to that God, that need, we have to feel that need ourselves. So each of us has to ask ourselves this question. And this is the question, actually, so the organizers can tell me, we can ask this question and you can answer, or we could just leave that here, that I'm going to ask this question and then you think about this for the rest of the program on your own, so we can move on to the next presentation. But the question here is that, what is the problem that Islam is the solution for me? Because here Hazrat Masih Maud Islam is saying that this applies to all of us. It's a natural condition that we have a search for an exalted being. So if I'm going to call people towards God, I have to have had that search in myself. And I have to have found the answer in Islam. I have to have found something in God Almighty. If I've never had that search, then I'm giving people a solution to a problem that doesn't exist for me. There's no reality behind my dawat. There's nothing, my tabligh is empty in the sense. So before we're able to really do dawah, we're able to invite people to a solution, we have to have invited ourselves to it. So this is a question that I want each person to think about. And if there's time, we can answer it, which is that, what is an example? What is my experience where I felt this search after an exalted being within myself, which was in some way fulfilled in Islam? Because if I can find that search within myself, then I can identify it in that atheist or that agnostic or whoever it is, and tell them that I know this feeling because I felt it, and it's inherent in all of us if we find it, if we have that curiosity within ourselves. And not only have I had that question that I know you have within yourself, but I found the answer as well. So this is the last point, which is the point on Dawat and Tabligh. So let me just pull up that question here, which is that, give examples of how you have felt this search after an exalted being. So you can share this in the chat or in any way that that you like. So we can take maybe a couple of minutes, just for these answers. So, the last question that I asked, it was a tough question, but alhamdulillah, we had some pretty good answers, because it's a very philosophical thing. What is good and evil? What's an example of people who talk about good and evil where they're just giving pure opinions? But now this is a difficult question as well. As Masih Maud Islam said, we all have this search. So can anyone share any example of how they felt this search within themselves? You don't have to share the answer. You don't have to share the solution that you had some miraculous experience of God showed you a vision or a dream or something like that. No, just enough to have that search. So I can give an example of myself, that when I was a teenager, what inclined me towards Islam is that, a couple of things happened in my life where I realized where I lost something, and I realized that life is temporary and I'm going to die eventually. So when we start thinking about the fact that we're going to leave this world, we start looking for something more. It has to be something more than just getting a job, living that zombie existence. There has to be something more. So for me, it was losing something personally that made me search, that I need to find something more. So that's a search that I had as a teenager. And we had the search continues our life, where then I was looking for an answer in Islam. So now when I do tabligh to an atheist, what I can do is I can try and identify the search in that person based on my experience. And when I tell them that this is how Islam can give you a solution, I'm giving a solution to a problem that really exists for me. I'm not just talking about, something that I've never experienced. So we're not talking here about you having received a revelation, a crazy spiritual experience or anything. Just where have you felt that search in your life that Hazrat Masih Maud Islam is talking about, a search for God, a search for a higher being. Okay, so we're here at 5:40, so I don't want to take any more time, but it is a bit of a tough question, so please do post it in the chat menu, and then maybe it can be acknowledged in the chat menu. One person said that if I'm distracted by worldly things and start to move away from my ibadat, I start to feel empty and restless. If I start to give more attention to prayers, I feel comfortable. For me, searching to make connection with God is a search for peace of mind. So basically, what you're talking about there is that when we're involved in the temporary things of this world, it's natural for a human being to feel empty and restless. That feeling of emptiness and restlessness, as Masih Maud Islam said, is a natural human condition. So this example that Shahryar Saab gave is something we can think about within ourselves. That when do I feel this feeling of emptiness and restlessness? Zadik Bhai wrote that pursuing material success at the expense of God and feeling empty and unsuccessful. So this is something that a lot of people describe when they achieve their career ambitions. They get whatever they wanted and they realize that I don't feel successful. Is this everything did they realize that no, I've been created for something greater? So then later pursuing God and having material needs taken care of seemingly without effort or worry. So that's an experience that one of our khuddam shared as well. So with those, I'll end this presentation. And the last point of the presentation is what I want to leave you with, which is that when we invite people to something, when we invite them to Islam, we're inviting them to a solution. That is a solution to a problem. If we are inviting people to a solution without having first identified the problem, without having had the problem in our own lives, without having felt it, then we have to take a step back and then reflect on ourselves. That's tarbiyat, that's muhasibah. So when we feel this search for God Almighty, then we can identify it in others, and then we can call them to God Almighty. Religion gives me a feeling of purpose, where without it, I feel lost. It is as if a piece is missing. Okay, Jazakallah Fazil Sahib. So now I'll turn it back over to the organizers. Jazakallah Sanal Jaza.